start a recording. There we go. Cool. All right. So we've come a long way, and we're coming back full circle to Express and our server side. And we're going to talk about authentication data flow and the method with which we're going to implement it, which is server-side sessions. So first, a big disclaimer is that today we're not talking about web security. We're just talking about the flow of data involved when we're logging users in and keeping them logged in, which is very different from security per se. Like you may have heard that there are these 3 A's of like web development. Here we have authentication, that is this person who they say that they are? Authorization, is this person allowed to do X, Y, and Z? And accounting, like who is using all of our bandwidth, like where are these requests coming from? And the one that we're going to deal with today is just this one, authentication. This person is coming to us and they're saying, hey, I'm so-and-so, don't you believe me? So we're going to go ahead and we're going to figure out how we can deal with this. The general outline of the way this works, at least the way that we understand it right now, is more or less what you'd expect. On the client side, you go ahead and you create your, you have a username or perhaps your email, and you establish a password. And then you send that password to the server via HTTP. And then a row in the database gets created corresponding your username or email with your password. So then on subsequent attempts, you'll go back and you'll sign in. You'll enter your password in a password field, send it again over HTTP to the server, and then what your server might do is compare the password that you've sent with the password that's stored in the database. And if they match, then hey, you are who you said you are. We're going to see tomorrow that there is some problems with this model of login and sign up, and we'll start to address them. But for today, we're just going to keep things relatively simple like this. So here's our problem: is once we log in, how do we keep that user logged in? Like we know what doing this looks like in general. Like when you're logged into Gmail or Spotify or whatever, and you refresh the page, it doesn't ask you to log in again. Some kind of persistent state is maintained so that Google or Spotify or whoever continues to know who you are even after you refresh the page. But as we know, HTTP is a stateless protocol. You get one request, one response. Like there's not sort of this way of maintaining like some kind of like extra information with it as well. So we might ask, like, how do we store some information about each client-server relationship, which we might call a session? What are some ideas? How can we address this? Just based off of what we know right now, what are some ways we could try to hack this? No thoughts?
So what are we trying to figure out again? Just to clarify.
Yeah, what do we do if we want to store some information about each client-server relationship?
Let's see.
Maybe something with the browser.
Right.
Yeah, we could do something. We could put something in the browser. We could just have some kind of like JavaScript object or variable living in memory that's saying like, okay, like, hey, like we're talking. We could do the same thing on the server as well. We could put something in the database representing like this is our session. But either one of these two approaches, we've got a little bit of a problem because if we were to keep just like some kind of like JavaScript object in memory on the browser, then as soon as we refresh, it's going to get wiped out. It's going to get removed from memory. We're going to refresh the page, make another request for our HTML document, which will make another request for our JavaScript, and we'll be right back to start. And if we just go ahead and store, like these like login credentials in the database, that means that we're going to have to send our login credentials with every single request, which isn't ideal either. So here's the way that we are going to solve this problem, the way that we're going to lend some kind of state to our otherwise stateless HTTP protocol is with this thing called a cookie. So what is a cookie exactly? See if I know.
I guess it's some, it's not really a program, but it's something that stores state between like state for like given web pages. I think it's something like that.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. What it is literally is it's just a small text file that gets stored in a browser and included with HTTP requests to a server. And using this little text file, we can just go ahead and we can just write down a little bit of information about who we are, about our relationship with the server. And as far as cookies are concerned, each each client server relationship gets its own cookie. We'll see what that looks like in a moment. So here's our HTTP request response cycle as we know it. We've got our client here, which makes a request, which travels very far over the internet to our server. And our server, having received that request, is going to send a response back. So here's what happens when we introduce cookies into the mix. If we start to bake some cookies, is our client still is going to make a request to our server. And what our server is going to do is it's going to say, hey, have we talked before? Has this client ever contacted me? If not, then what I'm going to do is with my response, I'm going to give you this little thing called a cookie. I'm just going to, and the way this manifests itself is just with an HTTP header, one of those metadata headers that gets sent back, along with things like the content type and all those various other little bits of metadata. It's just going to say, hey, we've never talked before, and I know that we haven't talked before because this request that you sent me previously doesn't have a cookie on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this little cookie for you, and I'm going to send a response back, and that's going to include this cookie. So your browser, having received this HTTP response, is going to notice that there's a cookie on it, and it's going to tuck it away in the bit of storage that's allocated for your browser. Your browser just knows how to do this because that's part of the way that browsers work, is they inspect incoming HTTP requests for cookies on them. And if it finds one, it will store it. So now your client, your browser, has this cookie tucked away in storage, and it's associated with this server. So the next time you make a request to that server, the cookie will go along with the request. Your browser will include it for you automatically. So now your server is going to be like, hey, client, have we ever talked before? Oh, we must have, because you've included this cookie along with your request. So now the server can go ahead and it can do something with that cookie. It might have written down some information about hey, next time this person makes a request with this cookie, this is who I was talking to. I can go ahead and I can remind myself about who this client was. And then we'll just send a response back, because we always send responses back. So any questions on that sort of fundamental life cycle there?
Why didn't you get a cookie jar graphic for the storage?
Yeah, I know. I should have. I'm sorry. Next time. It is actually what they're called, cookie jars, I think.
So Tom, if somebody disables cookies on their browser, would this cause a problem?
It would only cause a problem if you're trying to be remembered. So if you disable cookies on your browser, this means that back at this stage, your server would see the request and it would include a cookie, but then when your cookie gets back here to the client, if your browser has cookies disabled, that cookie will not get stored. You'll be like, I'm not hungry, no cookies for me, please. And you'll just maintain a regular stateless connection.
Mm-hmm.
So no cookie, and then the cookie doesn't come back with the request, so your server is unable to do something with the cookie. So the way this might manifest is if you're, say, for example, Gmail or something like that, then this would mean that you would need to, every time you refresh the page, you would need to log in again.
Right.
Cool. Any other questions?
And it's just stored as text? Is it like is it stored internally as a JSON object as text, or it's just you can format it however you want?
Yeah, you can format it as JSON, but it's just a little text file.
Okay.
Just plain text. Yeah. Oh, and if we want to, actually, just to not to digress too much, but we can go ahead and we can let's take a look really quick. Let's go and let's find. Let's go say, for example, hey, here's learn dot, or maybe let's not do learn dot. Let's do, it's fine. Yeah, say like here I am in learn dot. If I go over here to, let's see, where is it? Is in a, or no, it's an application. If I go to application, then like here I can see stuff that is that's in storage, and one of those things is I can see cookies. So I can see like here are just like a whole bunch of cookie data right here. It's just we got some key value pairs, so I can see that I've got like name, HSID, and like all these various things. They're just key value pairs being stored here.
Okay.
These are all for different domains as well. Let's find the. Yeah, I think here are some for Full Stack Academy. I've got other ones here for, say, like YouTube and things like that. Yeah, usually you're not going to need to worry too much about like going in and like looking at like the cookies here, unless you want to delete them while you're testing, because usually they're going to be consumed by your JavaScript code.
Okay.
Let's watch this amazing graphic one more time. Cool. And so the way that we're going to leverage cookies with our sessions is that we're going to find a way to work it out so that we don't need to authenticate for every request. Our server is going to use that cookie to remind us about who's logged in. So here's how that might work is our client will make a request to the server. And what the server will do is it's going to make a server session. That is, it's going to just use, say, for example, a JavaScript object somewhere in the memory of the server. And it's going to say something like, okay, here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw up a unique ID for this particular client-server connection. It's going to say, okay, I'm going to draw up some information here. And then in my internal sessions store, there's just a JavaScript object somewhere. I'm going to, at the key value of this ID, I'm going to store some information about like who this person is. I could write down their name and like all this information. I'm just going to keep it here stored on the server in memory. And on this cookie, on this cookie, I'm going to write down this ID, the ID representing this client-server relationship, and send that back to the client here. So the client will have that cookie stored, and the next time they make a request, they'll make a request, and this cookie will have that ID written down on it. So then the server can go ahead and it can look up in its session store any information that it put onto that JavaScript object. It can take that ID and look up what we have stored. And then what we can do, and this is the clever part that our Express middleware is going to do, is it can attach it to, say, something like the request object. It can put it someplace like rec.session, and we can go back to having any information that we had stored away for that client on that piece of middleware, on our request object, sorry. And of course, we always send a response back. So here's what that looks like, is the server is going to give the client a cookie that just has an ID written on it. And it sends that back to the client, and the client is going to keep that cookie and send it with all requests automatically. You don't even need to think about it. This is what browsers do. So then when the server gets a request that contains that cookie, it's going to grab the ID on it, and it's going to go ahead and it's going to load up any information that we stored away in that session store, which could be as simple as just a JavaScript object being stored in RAM. It could also be a row in a database, and we'll see some ways to do that automatically. But for now, for today, the way that we're going to be dealing with it is it's just going to be an object that's kept by the middleware internally in RAM. So any questions on this concept?
Is that a safe way to store like a session data, I guess? Like, can it be intercepted easily?
It can be intercepted, but typically it's going to be encrypted using what we call a session secret, and this is going to be a secret that's kept on the server. So unless somebody has access to your secret, they'll be unable to unencrypt the data that's stored on the cookie. That gets a little bit into web security, which let's not focus on for today. Let's save it for tomorrow, because there's going to be quite enough here. Cool. All right, let's get close up with sessions in detail. Cool. So this is the same data flow that we've looked at before, just in a little bit more detail. So over here, we've got our server. This is our backend. It has our Express app on it, which contains like our logging middleware, our routing middleware, and the thing that we're going to introduce here is our session middleware. This is going to be the thing that does the magic for us. So let's say that our server is http://yourapp.com. So over here, we've got your client, your browser, and it has never visited our server before. It has never made a request to http://yourapp.com. We visited other websites. We've visited GitHub, we've visited coolsite.com, and we've got other cookies for them, but we don't have any for yourapp.com. So if we go ahead and we make a GET request to yourapp.com, we're going to go ahead and here's what our GET request might look like. You can see that there's a get/http 1.1, host is your app. We've got all these metadata headers, and we don't have any cookie info yet. There's nothing included in this HTTP request representing a cookie. So what we'll do is we'll make our GET request, which will be handled by our Express app and turned into that request object that we're familiar with in our middleware, which makes it nice and easy to deal with. So it might a request might go through the logging middleware and get logged out, and then it might be received by our session middleware. And your session middleware is going to take a look at that request. It's going to take a look at our HTTP request, and it's going to be like, hey, there's no cookie info on this request. So let's make a session. So what I'm going to do now is I'm your session middleware. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a new entry in the session store, which is just an object. It's just a hash table in memory holding key value pairs. So it's going to create this key, which is going to be your session ID. And the value that we store is going to be any information that we want to persist across various requests. Typically, this might be something like your user's ID. So it's going to attach these values to the request object as rec.session and add the session ID to the cookie in the response object. So we got our session store, we've got information here, and now we've got this rec.session object. And these are the same object here. It's a reference to the same place in the session store. So anything we stick on rec.session will get persisted in our session store over here. So here's our response. So on the HTTP response, here's what we're going to do is we're going to add this header set cookie, and it might look something like this. It might say my UID equals 1AF9B0D. So you can see that that corresponds to this key value in our session store. So we'll go ahead, our request will continue to go through our routing middleware, and we might go ahead and we might attach stuff to rec.session so that those get stored away here in our session store. So then eventually, we're going to get to the end of the line, and our Express server is going to make a response, which contains that little cookie header that we got. So your browser is going to see this response, and it's going to be like, oh, hey, here's this set cookie header. So what I'm going to do is put this away in storage. I'm going to put this in the cookie jar. So our response might contain the HTML. We'll go ahead and we'll render that and everything, but we'll go ahead and we'll put the cookie for http://yourapp.com in storage. So now the next time we make a request to http://yourapp.com, here's our request again. This time, because we've got a cookie associated with yourapp.com, we'll include this cookie header. And this happens automatically. This isn't something that you need to do yourself. We'll include this attached cookie here with my UID equals 1AF9B0D. So that GET request will go containing our cookie. We'll go ahead and we'll go to our Express app. It'll go to our logging middleware. Then we'll go to our session middleware. And our session middleware will be like, hey, is there a cookie? Oh, hot dog, there is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this UID here to look you up on the session. So I'll be like, okay, that was 1AF9B0D. Oh, hey, here you are, 1AF9B0D. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab the information stored at that key, and I'm going to attach it onto rec.session, this object here, that now any of your downstream application routes can use to remember who we're talking to. So we'll just continue on our way. Any questions on that before we get into the next bit? Cool. So let's look at what this looks like when we have many different browsers that are making requests. So it's not too much different, just that they each get their own session and session ID. So here we've got two browsers now. We've got client 1, which is a browser of its own, and then we have client 2. Let's say like this is me up here, and this is Casio on his laptop. So if browser 1, if I make a request to yourapp.com, I can see that I've got my own cookie for yourapp.com with my UID equals 2R9op7. So that's going to go and it's going to reach our session middleware. And the session middleware is going to take that cookie and it's going to be like, oh, hey, who is this? Oh, hey, 2R9, here you are. And for this request response cycle, I'll set a rec.session equal to the information that I've got in the session start for 2R9. But then if Casio goes ahead from his laptop and makes a request to yourapp.com, he's got his own cookie, my UID, HK7. Just going to go ahead and it's going to get to our session middleware. Our session middleware will be like, oh, hey, who are you? HK7, good old HK7. I'm going to go ahead and look up you in the session store and attach the information I find there to rec.session for this request response cycle. So the way that it works is you get a session, everybody gets a session. We've all got our own sessions. Cool. So any questions on any of that before we get into the lab and practice using sessions ourselves? Cool. So before I stop the share, let me go ahead and let me actually log into Learn.Dot here. So the lab.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Question.
I was just going to ask a question about. Let's see. How is like if you're logged into a website or something, how is the cookie persisted across multiple computers? Like. I guess you would download it whenever you log in. Never mind.
Yeah. Well, like if you have two different laptops, like those are two different cookies. You know, like if you log in, say like, let's say like you've got a brand new phone and you've got a brand new computer, and on your computer you go ahead and you log into Facebook. You know, so you enter your credentials, and then from there on out you're logged into Facebook. You've got a cookie and you got a session with Facebook. But if you go ahead and you open up your brand new phone and you like open up Facebook, it's not smart enough to know that like, hey, on your laptop you were talking to Facebook. So you have to log in there as well. And your client server connection for Facebook, you get your own cookie from the phone, let's say. So the way that it works is like, while you might be authenticating as the same user, it's the client server connection that has that connection, not necessarily like the person who's authenticating. What matters is the actual physical client.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
There's a difference between the client and the who you're logged in as. Okay.
Yeah, you might even say like, if you were to open up, say like Chrome and Firefox and Safari, you know, like those are all different cookies because they're different browsers.
Okay.
Cool. Any other questions? Yeah, and that's something that's important to keep in mind too, because it's something that you can help leverage when you're trying to test something, because then you might find yourself using, say like your private browsing tab, or open up like different browsers as a way of just making sure that you have kind of like different like, you know, like users and or different things when you're testing some application that requires you to be logged in as like multiple people at the same time. It can be very helpful. Cool. So the lab that we're about to do is this one here called Sessions. There's not an image, unfortunately. Very sorry about that, as always. But we'll walk you through using our Express middleware library of choice for dealing with sessions, which is called Express Session. And while we're not going to be dealing with logged in users just yet, we're actually going to be doing another counter exercise. So, but by doing this, we're going to get used to the way that that sessions work here, and we'll get used to the idea of what we're actually going to be manipulating. Because something that you'll probably be kind of like curious about when you do this is sort of like, where's the cookie? But the fact of the matter is, you're not actually going to really be manipulating the cookie at all, because on the server, it's your Express Session middleware that consumes the cookie from the HTTP request. And on the browser, your browser takes care of storing and including the cookie with all of your HTTP requests. So as far as you're concerned, the cookie is almost kind of like invisible. As long as you have the Express Session middleware set up, you can go ahead and you can establish these like these stateful sessions without necessarily needing to dive down into the weeds of the actual like implementation of the cookie, like we just dealt with. So the most important concept for like what you'll be manipulating is dealing with the actual like rec.session object itself, which represents an object in the session store. So let's go ahead and let's stop the share. Stop the recording.